We'll ask all the members to take their seats. This hearing is called Women in Technology, Increasing Opportunity in Driving International Development. And around the world, women and girls are frankly the hardest hit by poverty. I think people realize that. But at the same time, empowering women can be the best way to lift them and their families out of that poverty. As our guest Gina Davis has said, believing in yourself is the greatest gift. Today, few tools have the potential to empower women and girls like the Internet. Whether it's access to online education, or whether it's job opportunities, or expanding that social network, the Internet can dramatically increase a woman's access to information, dramatically increase her opportunity for her and her family. A recent survey in 4 developing countries found that of those women who reported using the Internet, 75% said they used the Internet to further their education. Many women surveyed also noted that the Internet and other mobile applications dramatically reduced the time, dramatically reduced the cost associated with tasks like learning about health concerns, arranging transportation, borrowing and saving money. Just ask the female fisherman in Kenya who now uses a popular mobile service to store and transfer money using just her cell phone that protects her business savings, protects her from theft. It enables her to spend her money as she chooses. Frankly, it empowers her. Yet while we take the Internet for granted here, more than 4 billion people, 2/3 of the world's population, lack access to that Internet. And women are more likely to be offline than men. Across the developing world, that's 200 million fewer women than men that have access to that Internet. And the disparity is particularly great in Asia and in the Middle East and in sub-Saharan Africa, where women are half as likely as men to be online. And this means women are being excluded from one of the most powerful drivers of personal and economic opportunity of all time. And this is a problem for more than just those women who are left out. It means that families, communities, states, institutions are all held back as well. Study after study has shown that women spend more of their income on their families and communities, prioritizing things like what? Food, medicine, education. That then improves the outcomes for their children. And in terms of broader economic growth, that means it reduces the disparity in women's online access. And what would the GDP boost be if we were able to do this to the portions of the world that do not have that kind of access? It would be $4 to $5 billion. So it seems clear that failing to include women in the technology revolution is a big mistake. Likewise, failing to consider technology in our aid and in our diplomacy remains another costly oversight. The Internet is fast becoming as essential to a country's economic growth as electricity was, as ports are, as the rule of law is, and that is why the committee is developing legislation to ensure Internet access is a priority in U.S. development projects. For one, our aid agencies could better coordinate to lay fiber optic cable under roads being constructed in the developing world. That's kind of a no-brainer. In addition to having equal access to technology, it is important for women to have equal access to creating that technology. Globally, there are fewer women than men in science, in technology, in engineering, and math, in these STEM careers. However, there are some countries that have succeeded in having at least 50% of their STEM degrees awarded to women. Countries like the United Arab Emirates, Bulgaria, Oman are pushing in that direction. They have 50%. We need to address what is holding women back from entering the sciences in so many other countries, including ours, I'll add. The internet has changed the way that we buy, that we sell, that we educate, that we socialize. It has transacted more international commerce than any other marketplace, with trillions of dollars pumped across the net daily. It's a tremendous opportunity, but it is only an opportunity for those who have access to it. This hearing will help us understand what is needed so that more, especially women, more people can take advantage of this revolutionary technology and in the process bring a better life for their families and communities and more opportunity and hope. So I now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Elliot Engel of New York, for his opening comments.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling this hearing. Let me welcome. I don't know. Yeah, let me welcome our Mike. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know. Let's try this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's better. For calling this hearing. Let me welcome our witnesses to the Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you for your hard work, shining a light on what I view as an intersection of two issues critical to our foreign policy: the challenges facing women and girls as the growing reach of modern technology, I'm looking forward to a good discussion. I'd like to note that for the second time this month, our committee has a panel made up entirely of women. 2 weeks ago, Assistant Secretary Patterson and Assistant Secretary Nuland were here testifying on the crisis in Syria. And today, we have this distinguished group. It's amazing the way technology has changed the way we access numbers, respond to crises, or simply communicate with one another. Today, a coffee planter in East Africa with a smartphone can know what his produce is worth in London. A doctor anywhere in the world can pull up a patient's medical record with the push of a button. Classrooms with broadband access have a gateway to an incredible wealth of knowledge, information, and face-to-face connections with people a world away. Of course, technology can also be exploited for nefarious purposes. We know that ISIS has taken advantage of everyday encryption technology and even video games to communicate and orchestrate attacks like the one in Paris. These abuses underscore why we need a full understanding of the way technology is growing and changing the global landscape, but they should not blind us to the fact that technology has brought massive benefits to billions of people around the world. At the same time, it's important to recognize that those benefits have not been evenly distributed. When we focus on access to technology, we see that women and girls are at a tremendous disadvantage, just as they are in so many other areas. Women in developing countries are 23% less likely than men to be online. In South Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa, the gap is nearly 35%. And in sub-Saharan Africa, it jumps to 45%. Those are really shocking statistics. Some of this disparity is due to structural economic inequality. The cost of technology can be prohibitive in places where women are not full participants in their economies. Some of this problem stems from other norms and ideas about women and girls that keep them as second-class citizens. For example, across much of the developing world, internet cafes are the easiest way to get online. The constraints of childcare and responsibilities at home make this a difficult option for some women. Access to mobile technology could help break down these barriers, but around the world, 200 million fewer women than men own mobile phones today. It's unbelievable. But beyond these practical limitations in many countries, internet cafes and the internet in general are considered inappropriate for women and girls. Even in some of the most remote areas, internet cafes are packed with boys and young men, but women and girls are left out. In Azerbaijan, only 14% of women have ever been online, 14%, while 70% of men have access to the internet. In India and Egypt, 1 in 5 women reported believing that the internet is inappropriate for them. Can you imagine that? Their reasons for not getting online range from concerns that their families would disapprove to not knowing how the internet could benefit their lives. The reality, of course, is that access to technology could not only improve the lives of individual women, but could help to lift entire communities and entire countries. We know that keeping women and girls on the sidelines of society is a major drag on growth and prosperity. When women become full economic and political participants, the results are huge in terms of driving economic progress, improving health and education, and raising standards of living. Getting more technology in the hands of more women is a critical way to tap that potential. According to a recent study sponsored by Intel, getting an additional 150 million women online would add $13 to $18 billion to the combined annual GDPs of 144 developing countries. They would help countries become stronger, more stable partners on the world stage and add fuel to the global economy. So the question isn't why should we break down the gender divide when it comes to technology, but how do we break down that divide? What education and training efforts will best provide women with the knowledge they need to use technology for their benefit? What kind of partnerships will help make technology more accessible and affordable? How do we address the out-of-date taboo that technology is somehow inappropriate for women and girls? It's unbelievable. I hope our witnesses can offer their guidance in these areas, because I honestly believe that expanding access to technology could help solve so many problems. I thank you again for all you do, all of you. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ingold. This morning, we're joined by a distinguished panel. We have Ms. Gina Davis, in addition to acting in multiple critically acclaimed movies. She is the founder and chair of the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media. She also currently serves as the special envoy for women and girls at the International Telecommunications Union at the United Nations. We have Ms. Sonia George. She is executive director of the Alliance for Affordable Internet. She has over 20 years of experience in information and communication technologies in both the private and the nonprofit sector. And we have Ms. Joyce Warner, and she is Senior Vice President and Chief of Staff at the International Research and Exchanges Board. She had a long career of serving in various international organizations with a focus on women's health and women's development. So without objection, the witnesses' full prepared statements will be made part of the record. Members here will have 5 calendar days to submit any statements or questions that you might have or extraneous material that you want in the record of today's hearing. And so I would suggest if the witnesses would like to summarize their remarks, we'll begin with Ms. Davis. Thank you very much again for your testimony today.
There we go. Thank you, Chairman Royce, very much, and Ranking Member Engel and committee members. It's a great honor to be invited to testify here at this hearing on women in technology, increasing opportunity and driving international development. The efforts of the committee to ensure that women and girls are included and have the same opportunities as men and boys around the world are so appreciated, especially when it comes to the internet. I've spent most of my adult life advocating for women and girls as a trustee for the Women's Sports Foundation, as chair of the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, as an official partner with UN Women, and as the chairman mentioned, ITU Special Envoy for Women and Girls in ICTs. The empowerment of women and girls is an issue I am extremely passionate about, and it's why I founded my research institute, which studies gender in children's media to help women and girls to be seen and heard and valued across the globe. Technology is having a huge impact on my community, the entertainment industry, in terms of how content creators are using digital platforms to not only serve as the gateway for delivering movies and television programming, but also for the creation of new ways of building global communities. And the internet is having a profound impact on how the world engages with media and can provide endless opportunities to empower women and girls and to help create a systemic cultural shift by improving how they're portrayed and represented. These are the tools that will ultimately raise the value of women and girls in society. My institute has sponsored the largest body of research ever done on gender images in children's media, covering over a 20-year span, and we work side by side with the leading content creators to dramatically improve how women and girls are represented in media targeting children 11 and under. Our study of the careers of female characters in family films and in primetime and children's TV, conducted by Dr. Stacy Smith of the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, shows that women are missing from critical occupational sectors such as the STEM fields. Out of nearly 6,000 speaking characters in family films, males held 84% of all STEM jobs. This calculates to a ratio of 5 male STEM characters for every 1 female STEM character. No female leads or co-leads were shown with STEM careers. Looking across the categories of computer science and engineering, the ratio of males to females in these areas was 14.25 to 1. And in television, characters with STEM jobs were 79% male and 21% female. The vast gender inequality in media aimed at children is extremely significant, as television and movie images wield enormous influence on how cultures perceive the value of women and girls, and in establishing societal norms. Improving these perceptions can be the real game changer in achieving greater empowerment and participation of girls and women in the technology sector. My institute's tagline is, "If they see it, they can be it." Technology has tremendous potential to transform women's and girls' lives, whether through STEM career choices or by access to services such as e-health, e-education, e-commerce, e-banking, and other applications that can help women and girls address their day-to-day challenges. We need to vastly improve the gender divide. As the chairman pointed out, there were 200 fewer women online than men at the end of 2013. We need to bridge the opportunities gap. Women earned only 18% of U.S. computer science degrees. Women make up less than 20% of the U.S. ITC workforce and only 30% of the European ICT workforce. This cannot stand, given the predicted skills shortfall in the ICT sector of at least 2 million jobs globally by 2020. Encouraging women and girls to pursue careers in tech is critical to closing the economic gender gap. Studies from the ITU have demonstrated that companies that have a gender balance of women working in high-level positions on corporate boards have shown improved financial results. Women and girls will seek the skills to pursue these career opportunities if they can see other women in these roles and be inspired by them. The lack of real-world female role models in tech careers means that it's imperative for fictional female characters in STEM fields to be shown in entertainment media aimed at children. Technology, and particularly broadband, will be absolutely crucial for achieving all 17 of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals and all 3 pillars of sustainable development: economic development, social inclusion, and environmental protection. They need technology as key catalysts. We have the opportunity to ensure that women and girls are fully included in the expansion of the digital world, and that their voices and presence are shaping the agenda of meeting SDG 5, which addresses gender equality. Access to digital technology will be key to meeting this goal by providing women with the means to educate themselves and their children, to improve their own health and the health of their families and communities, to start their own businesses, to keep themselves safe, and to innovate to shape the future that they want. Because I'm privileged to live in this country, as the mother of 3 children, I can encourage them to engage in any type of interest that they may want to pursue. I want to see a world where all children have the same possibilities and opportunities, a world where women and girls are valued equally to men and boys and have the freedom to pursue and achieve their dreams. Chairman Royce and Ranking Member Engel, once again, thank you very much for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Chairman Royce, Ranking Member Engel, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to submit a statement to the committee on opportunities for driving international development through increasing women's access to technology. This issue is critical if we are to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, agreed in September of this year. The United States can and should play a leading role in driving this agenda forward. The Alliance for Affordable Internet, A4AI, is the world's broadest technology sector alliance working to reduce the cost of broadband in developing countries. And through high-level advocacy and direct in-country engagement, the over 80 members or organizations of the alliance identify, research, and advocate for the policy and regulatory reforms needed to bring prices down and increase access to the internet. The incredible growth of ICTs over the past decade has transformed internet access into a force that is critical for sustainable global development. Indeed, President Obama declared earlier this year, the internet is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Research has shown the benefits of broadband penetration. Investing in increasing broadband penetration in developing countries could lead to a return on investment of up to $21 for each $1 spent. Of course, the benefits of connectivity go far beyond the economic, bringing better health care to rural, conflict-affected, and other underserved areas, helping farmers cope with climate change, and connecting millions of children and young people to free online courses and learning materials. E-governance and social media are enabling citizens to participate more actively in civic life, while also streamlining delivery of public services, a move that in Africa alone could result in technology-related productivity gains of 10 to 25 billion annually by 2025. Today, over 60% of the world's population, equivalent to 4.3 billion people, as was already said, remain offline. And these billions of people excluded from the life-changing possibilities of the internet are predominantly female and nearly all in the developing world. Mobile broadband, the primary means by which most citizens in the developing world access the internet, has been critical for expanding internet access. Mobile broadband across the developed world is widely spread, with penetration rates reaching nearly 90%. Yet, this rate drops to about 17% in Africa. This digital divide exacerbates existing economic and social inequalities and stifles development across the globe by keeping women and other marginalized populations, those who arguably stand the most to benefit from online connections, from accessing the empowering potential of the web. While an entry-level broadband connection costs about 1% of monthly incomes across developed worlds, it costs about 10% for most in developing countries and can reach over 100% of their incomes in many countries. High prices hit certain groups harder than high prices hit certain groups harder than others, and income inequalities mask the true scale of the problem in many countries. For billions living in poverty, earning less than $2 a day, the cost of a basic broadband connection is prohibitive. Women are nearly 50% less likely to access the internet than men in the same community. The Web Foundation study found that women are 30 to 50% less likely than men to use the internet to increase their income or participate in public life. We need to change that. We need to change the gender gap. We need to work together to change the conditions in which women can have access to the internet. Skills and relevance are also a barrier, another barrier important to address. To boost economic growth, empower democratic governance, and advance global development cannot be overlooked as a key component of US foreign policy, and there is a huge potential for the internet to have a role in that space. Here are some concrete actions that the US government can support and invest in. Support policy reform based on inclusive, multi-stakeholder processes that will lead to market growth and lower costs. Coordinate broadband expansion strategies with development in the energy sector. Invest in International Telecommunications Union, a UN agency, that does efforts to expand collection of gender indicators and support national statistics agencies to do the same. Support the development of inclusive and holistic national ICT and broadband plans that address all aspects of the access and use ecosystem. Recognize barriers faced by women and ensure privacy and safety online. Education programs and consumer campaigns to increase awareness of the utility of the internet, as well as trainings on basic skills and safety online, will be critical to ensuring women can access and fully utilize a safe and open web without any fear of retaliation. Incorporate digital skills education into education programs from primary school onwards. And finally, develop and support programs that provide public access and target underserved populations. I look forward to our discussion here today and your questions, and I thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. George. Ms. Warner.
Thank you, Chairman Royce, Ranking Member Engel, and distinguished members of the committee. On behalf of IREX, I am very honored to have the opportunity today to discuss our experience and the important relationship between women and information and communication technology in the developing world. I want to also thank my colleagues for their compelling remarks this morning, and I'll try to. You may find some overlap because I think we have some similar recommendations. Since 1968, IREX has worked in over 125 countries to build just, prosperous, and inclusive societies, and we use technology across much of our programming. Our work is supported by the generosity of the American people through the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. Agency for International Development, as well as private donors, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Our approach is to focus holistically on both IT access, but also broadening digital literacy. I know we've talked a lot this morning about why the issue is important, including improving GDP, and we've also talked about the alarming disparity for women and girls, the overall less access to the internet, less mobile ownership. I want to highlight also, though, that less training and exposure, even where access is available, is an important factor creating the digital divide. And according to the 2015 World Wide Web Foundation report, women are 1.6 times more likely to report a pure lack of skills as a barrier to internet use. And I think we would all agree that nations cannot develop and grow unless they engage their full human resource potential. And closing the gender digital divide will be key to achieving this. So I'd like to share a few things of what we've learned at IREX. First, women and girls need safe public access points. We know that girls and women often choose public libraries because they are perceived as safe and reliable and affordable. And we've partnered with the Gates Foundation in 11 countries to turn public institutions like libraries into internet access points. And we're pairing that with providing access and training librarians to support them. Second, it's really important to introduce girls to technology as early as possible and definitely no later than their adolescence. The after-school tech clubs IREX has created in 8 countries have helped girls gain digital skills with positive results into young adulthood, including increased confidence and employability. By supporting girls early on with digital literacy skills, we can help stem a lifetime of gender disparity. Third, we need to invest in and support infomediaries, and by this we mean trusted community members, teachers, librarians, other adults who can help coach and train both younger and older women to use technology effectively and positively. Infomediaries can also help them filter the massive amounts of information that are available. In addition to working with librarians, we've partnered with the State Department to expand the use of technology by master teachers from across the developing world, the overwhelming majority of which have had no prior training in using instructional technology in the classroom. The goal is to make technology a regular part of learning and not only a special subject or an elective. And finally, we've learned that women also need to find relevant and valuable information to them. And that's both available in their local language, but in addition, it's information they can use in their everyday lives. In partnerships with USAID and a local Jordanian research organization, we have just recently launched a gender clearinghouse. This is the first of its kind in Jordan, and it's allowing women to access information on their human rights. The core of what we need to achieve gender parity in technology around the globe exists today. And so we have a few recommendations. First, we need to expand the notion of literacy to include digital literacy. ICT needs to be included in the formal education. It's not a side subject. So while we used to have the 3 R's, I think now we need literacy, numeracy, and digital literacy. We need them all working together. And we need to introduce that as early as possible. Second, we should prioritize investments in community institutions like schools and libraries where we can build on an existing infrastructure for public access. For example, there are 320,000 libraries in the world, and 70% of them are in developing countries. Imagine if each was connected to the internet and staffed with a skilled infomediary to support internet access by women and girls. Third, we need to balance the overall expanding of IT access with better digital literacy and skills and ongoing coaching so that women and girls can use this technology to better their economic, family, and life outcomes so as to not inadvertently, without those skills, expand the divide rather than shrink it. And finally, we should look across all the work we're doing in the U.S. government and among our development partners and make sure that everything we do is taking the gender digital divide into account. Whether we're working on health or food security or environmental issues, are we looking at everything and making sure that we are addressing this wherever it is possible? And increasing mobile subscriptions alone will not actually purely equalize this gender divide. Governments, international agencies, nonprofits, and private enterprises need to work together. And I thank the committee for this opportunity.
I thank you, Ms. Warner. We thank all our witnesses here. Let me start with a question that goes to this issue of how the media itself portrays women working in the STEM fields. And my first thought here would be, because the studies that you've focused on here in industrialized nations, because that's rebroadcast out around the world, both are lesser representation on screen and off screen, probably impacts the number of women and girls interested in STEM in the developing world. And that's the essence of my question there.
Absolutely. You're right. 80% of the media consumed globally is made in the United States. My institute has also researched, done the first global gender in film study, and the representations are no better in foreign films as far as women in these fields. And the importance of it is, I can't overemphasize how powerful media images are, and they can be in both a positive and a negative way. For example, there being far too much stereotyping and hypersexualization of female characters. That's obviously negative. But if you show female characters doing non-traditional and important things, the message comes across clearly. The most interesting example I have of that is in our study of the careers of television female characters. One of the most well-represented professions was women in forensic science. There are so many female forensic scientists on TV because of the CSI shows and everything that I don't have to work to get more representation there. And in real life, the numbers of women wanting to pursue this career has absolutely skyrocketed. I think about 75% of people wanting to study this field are female, and colleges are scrambling to keep up with the demand for the courses. So it just shows what I mentioned earlier as the words we live by is, if girls can see it, they can be it. And because we fail to have enough real-life female role models in these fields, in the STEM fields and ICTs, we need them on screen so that girls can see that. And we need them in great numbers as well. We have to have boys and girls see that women are good at science and good at engineering and math, and that's viable for them.
I've got another question here, and it goes to the use of technology. Some years ago, I passed an anti-stalking act here. But as technology changes, we're now seeing it's not just the phone, it's access to the internet as an area where what you might think might make women feel more secure, you've also got the online stalking, the online hacking that threatens their security. So have you seen any evidence, for the panel here, any evidence on balance that technology is decreasing the overall amount of harassment of women, or is technology just a neutral tool when addressing this cultural issue? At the end of the day, what's your perception on that issue, and how can we impact it?
Thank you. So I'm sure that everyone has something to share on that. I think what's one of the most important things to recognize, and a study by my colleagues at the Web Foundation just found this clearly through very in-depth research in 10 countries across the developing world, is that the reality is that the inequalities that exist offline are normally transferred to the online world, including the challenges, the difficulties, the norms tend to be duplicated online. And what we're doing, the way we work, is to ensure that, first of all, that is not the case, and that the kind of policies, the kind of programs, the kinds of projects to empower women, not just through access, but the way they adopt, the way they use technology, are informed, first of all, are safe, but also are informed by policies that will protect women to do that safely, but always giving them the voice that they need as women to express freely and in an open way. And that's very important. So it's important that we have the right programs in place to not only support, to protect women, but it's not just about the online world. That's just a replication of the huge inequalities that around the world we need to deal with as well in the offline world. So it leads us to think about other disparities that we know exist, that Jean already mentioned, that Joyce mentioned, in terms of education, in terms of the STEM fields, in terms of women's ability to have access to information, to understand their rights. In many countries in the developing world, the ability of women to understand and to use and act on their rights is very limited. And one thing that the online world and access to technology can do is allow women much faster and good access to information that they otherwise wouldn't have. And so in that way, we can use online platforms and the web and technology to not only increase women's ability to have more access to information, understand their rights, act on their rights, and have more support to have their own agency as women in their own societies.
Technology is going to be empowering. Mr. Series, I'm out of time. We'll go to Mr. Series.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. This is a very important issue for empowering women in many of these countries. I was just wondering, when you talk about the stigma that in some of these countries have women using the internet and getting good at it, would you call it jealousy? Just from the male role in some of these countries? Or what is actually the stigma that you're talking about? Anyone?
I would mention, stigma may be one element of it, but I think part of what we found effective is making sure that men, whether they're in a teaching role, whether they're in a family role, whether they're in a policy or an employer role, understand the value broadly of the internet for women. And so we've done some work with a partner in Nepal and India in very rural areas, and looking at rural community centers. And women who did not normally leave the house, once men were understanding more about how this might contribute economically economically, more financial transaction management for women, then I think once that was expressed and they understood that, then they were able to embrace the participation of women in technology more.
I think a tremendous amount is attributable to unconscious gender bias. If everyone is raised on, in a culture that doesn't show that women take up half the space in the world, that doesn't show women do half of the interesting things, men and women internalize an unconscious bias that most of us don't realize the extent of how much we have that, and so that needs to be overcome through education and through seeing women involved in this. But it's something that is inhibiting progress in so many sectors of society, and particularly in this one, is that people just aren't aware of the unconscious bias they have against women in these kinds of positions.
Yes, Ms. George?
Thank you. I totally agree with my colleague witnesses. I would like to say that, if you look at some of the recommendations that many of us already made on this table, they very much lead to exactly that question. How do we change that? And how do we, through education, through targeted programs and projects that are addressing some of those inequalities, change those ideas, but also that reality, and allow women to express and to have new opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have, and technology can have a role in that. So I would say that by bringing access that is meaningful, that is relevant to women's lives, that is relevant for them as economic agents, as social agents, as creators, as Gina mentioned, is extremely important. And women need to be supported to have those opportunities. Often, as we know, and in this country, we are very fortunate, but we are not at all at the point where we're supposed to be yet. Many programs, as you know, also in this country have supported women from embarking on STEM fields. And that's something that is also very needed everywhere, not just through the professions, but especially through cultural and social environments as well, where some of these differences, the lack of role models, the lack of opportunities have really kept women back. And we have a responsibility, not just as gender advocates, as I assume we all are, and I assume all of you are in this committee, to create opportunities for many more women to have those opportunities in their lives, being as social agents, as economic agents, as creators, whatever those women decide for their own lives, and that's really important. It's also their choice. We are here to create, and we want to create opportunities for women to be able to act on the choice that they have with technology, however they would like to use. But we need to make it relevant. We need to make it important. We need to make the technology useful and meaningful. If we don't do that, we fail at what we're doing.
Well, thank you. I always get jealous in my office when I have a staffer come in and teaches me how to work my computer or work my phone. And to me, that's a jealousy factor that is not just in my office, but I think in some of these countries also, when they see a woman being so good at some of these gadgets that you have today. But I thank you very much for being here, and thank you for all your information that you've given us. Thank you.
Eliana Ross-Leitonen,
Thank you.
former prosecutor from Florida.
Be afraid. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you for your testimony, and I apologize that I came late. So, Ms. Davis, I wanted to ask you if you could give all of us late arrivals an overview about what your very interesting institute is doing. How do you gauge success? What are the metrics that you use to know that you're doing what you seek to achieve? So I apologize, but I'm so interested in your work.
Thank you. Yes. So I've been doing this about 10 years. My institute has sponsored the largest amount of research ever done on gender depictions in children's media. And the reason I wanted the data was I wanted to be able to go directly to my colleagues in the industry. So rather than taking on the mantle of educating the public, because I have access to the creators of children's media, I can just go directly to them with this information. And it's proven to be invaluable. So many creators were simply not aware of how bereft of female presence the movies and television they made for kids was. In the area of television, we looked at all the different sectors, prime time and daytime and reality, but children's programs had the worst ratio of male to female characters. And that's true in family film ratings are also have about the same ratio of male to female characters. And so they're shocked. They're absolutely shocked. And I think we can attribute that to everyone having the same unconscious gender bias. We were all raised on the same ratio of male to female characters. In film, the ratio of male to female has been exactly the same since 1946. So it's in all of us, this idea that women do not take up half the space in the world and that they do not do half of the interesting things. And as we mentioned earlier, 80% of the media consumed globally is created in the United States. So we are, in fact, responsible for exporting a very negative impression of women around the world.
And in the 10 years, excuse me, that you've had the Institute and you've presented this, have you seen a market improvement? I know I've got 3 granddaughters, 6, 3, and 1.
Right.
And sometimes I'm just appalled by the shows that they watch, and they're supposedly on great kids-oriented stations.
Right.
And it's just such a lopsided view of women's roles in the world.
It really is. And the remarkable thing is how unconscious so much of it, people literally didn't think about this until we had the numbers. In fact, before I had the numbers and I spoke to people in my industry, very often they would say, oh, no, that's been fixed. That's all been fixed. And they would name a movie with one female character.
They would whip up another princess.
As proof that gender inequality had been fixed. So they were not aware that, that the populations were so bereft of female presence. So there's definitely a shift in their consciousness, and we've untapped a tremendous desire to do right by women and girls, but now they understand in what ways they need to do that. And we haven't been able to measure yet an increase in the percentage of female characters. As of 2014, it's still exactly the same. But I feel very confident predicting that within 5 years, the needle will move for the first time in nearly 7 decades.
And the filmmakers and the TV show makers, they will realize that they've got a wonderful audience there. I mean, it will be good for their intake in the box office hit and the ratings for TV shows, because parents are very well aware, not just moms, dads too. They're very well of the gender disparities that their kids are subjected to. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for excellent research that backs up what you're saying. And I think that you will be seeing the fruit of your labors coming up in the coming years. I congratulate all 3 of you. Thank you so much for having this hearing, Mr. Royce. Sorry that I came late. Thank you.
Mr. Elliot Engel of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Davis, thank you again for being here, and thanks to all the witnesses. Ms. Davis, in 2012, you were appointed by the ITU as the Special Envoy to promote technology among women and girls, and you've done incredible work on gender in the media with your institute. How women and girls are depicted in the media and entertainment industry affects, of course, how they perceive their abilities, talents, and their future prospects in life. So it's incredible work that you do. We've seen some progress on gender equality in the U.S. in the media. We've seen you as the role of the first female president on TV. I must say, for the record, I would like to see a female president. No names mentioned. But obviously, there is more to do. Can you comment on the fact that it's important for women and girls to access information and communication technologies to end gender equality and to empower them? But it also seems to me that we need to encourage men and boys as well to change their perception of women's roles. So if you could comment on that, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We find that the more hours of television a boy watches, the more sexist his views become, and that a girl's perceptions of what she can be in life goes down the more media she consumes. So, so it's a very negative and potent message that comes through for children. We always emphasize that it's equally important for boys to see women and girls engaged in unstereotyped activities, to be engaged in the STEM fields. My theory of everything and why I'm focused on what kids see first is that we are, in effect, creating a problem that we have to try to solve later on. We're instilling gender bias in boys and girls from the very first entertainments that they consume and the first popular culture they're exposed to. So that's why I'm so focused on what boys and girls see in the beginning, and it will change everything. I think if we can have kids grow up free of these biases, that we'll be looking at a different world when that happens, and that's why it's important around the world that we spread this message and we show women and girls taking up the space that's rightfully theirs.
You know, it's amazing because I even see it in my own kids who are now in their 20s and 30s that some of the perceptions or things, not only in this issue, but in many issues that I sort of grew up with and saw around me, that they are, it's incredulous to them that such things could even exist because they're raised in a different world. And so it's really important that we change those perceptions.
Right.
Thank you. Ms. Warner, our committee has held few hearings that focused on women's and girls' access to education. And if we look at these global reports, they indicate that the gender gap in primary education is closing, but women and girls continue, obviously, to lag behind in education rates in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. And the result of that is that 600 million women around the world are illiterate, which is nearly twice the amount, the number of men. So how do we go from promoting access to education to promoting digital literacy? Can we do both at the same time? And how important is it to introduce young girls to information and communication technologies at an early stage? Obviously, it's important.
Thank you. I would make a couple of points. First, I think that there's no going back on the technology, so we have to find a way to integrate it. And one of the ways we found to be effective is to look at what are teachers using around instructional technology and how are they engaging students across the subjects so that it's not just about teaching it as a separate subject. The second point I would make is that as we look at long-term engagement for women, and we have done a lot to increase access to primary education, that I think we are starting to see the challenges of not investing in secondary education, that's stopping things at primary. And so to the extent we can both advocate for, and even with limited resources, invest in seeing that more women to go into receive secondary education, and I should say quality secondary education, because I think, as we all know, just being in the classroom may or may not lead to educational outcomes. The World Wide Web Foundation has found that women who have had some secondary education are actually six times more likely to be online than women who have not had any secondary education. So I think the combination of not making it just a separate subject, now that is to say that we also agree we should expand the number of women in technology fields, in STEM fields, and make that investment. But in addition to doing that, we need to make technology just not seem like something separate to daily life.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for your great testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Elliot. Mr. Ted Yoho of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the panelists being here. And, you know, there is a paradigm shift going on. I'm a veterinarian by trade, and I graduated in 1983. And up to the 70s, it was a male-dominated field. And when I went to vet school, it was about 65% male and 35% female. Now it's about 10% male, 90% female, and it's changed. And I think a lot of the professions have done that. And I think in large part, you know, what they see on television. So I commend you for doing that. And of course, your role in A Long Kiss Goodnight, you know, being a housewife that was a chef, that, you know, I still remember the chefs do those things, you know, and that was a great movie. And I'm sure that's inspired a lot of people.
Hopefully not to become assassins.
Great movie. Anyways, what I have seen is, you know, when we look around and when we have 60% or greater of the world's population, as was mentioned, off the internet, 4.3% or 4.3 billion offline, and primarily women, what experiences do you find with the illiteracy rate being that high in relationship to using the internet? If we want to start with you, Ms. George, what do you see with that? I mean, is it hard to get people to transition over that, and what are you finding as far as problems?
Yes, it is indeed, and education is a key variable that determines how women not only engage with technology, but use it in a way that is meaningful. So not just for receivers of information, a one-channel way of receiving information, but actually acting on the information that they can receive, that they can use, that they can learn from. And in fact, you know, our recent study showed exactly that and proved that, again, education, if you don't have that variable there, if it's not addressed, it really limits the way women can engage with the information and technology. So, and that's why it's so important, and that, for us and for IREX and so many, colleagues like, Gina's Institute, to really focus on the education piece, because it's a key ingredient to make sure that when women have access, they can not only engage with that technology much more meaningfully, but they can also use that access in ways that will be more productive.
Let me ask you this. How much are you using the internet for education, you know, like a classroom to bring the world experts to teach, if any of you have experience with that? And what are you seeing? Is it more productive than having in-room classrooms, or as an assistant to a person in the classroom? Anybody?
With the caveat that I'm not an education specialist, I am, an expert in policy and regulation. I have to say that from my experience also as a mother and doing a lot of research and reviewing a lot of really good research by many of our partners, it is important to have both. There's never just one kind of curriculum that should just be focusing on technology or not. It's the combination and using technology in a way that is useful for implementing the curriculum, for bringing skills up, et cetera. It's not that technology is a silver bullet, but that technology is an extremely useful element for education to improve the quality. Exactly. But in developing countries, what's interesting, and it's important for us to highlight here because we are focusing on international development questions, when there is very little education or no access to education at all, is extremely important that the internet has become one platform to have access to information and educational tools that otherwise wouldn't be there. So the gaps and the realities of those environments are also quite different than, say, the environments that you would have here as privilege, where our children go to schools, where my children, all of them have access to either a Chromebook or an iPad or what have you.
Right.
Those are, exceptions when you consider the entire world, and especially the developing world that we are focusing on, and the situation of women and girls in the developing world.
All right.
And so
Let me go to Ms. Warner, because I saw her reaching for the button. Let me get a response from her.
Thanks. I would say that technology all by itself is neutral. So really what's key from an educational setting is making sure that folks know how to effectively use the technology in a learning context. So that may be to either supplement with newer information in the STEM fields. We use it a lot with English language learning, so native speakers' voices can be brought in around the world. But I think the second issue is using it as a type of learning method. Does it engage more for project-based learning? Does it teach some of the critical skills more than the rote learning that we want to see, that are 21st century skills that so many employers around the world are seeing lacking?
Ms. Davis, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with what they said. I'm not an expert in that field, but it makes a lot of sense.
All right, well, I appreciate it. I'm out of time, and thank you for being here, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Bill Keating of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to welcome a graduate of Wareham, Massachusetts High School, Ms. Davis, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm in the next town over in Bourne, and I'm sure we're all proud of your success and the work you're doing in this regard. I wanted to touch base on something I think is just as important, too, and that's how important your work is for males and young men. I mean, a mother is a child's first teacher, and particularly in other countries in the world, as well as domestically, empowering mothers to have this information, to have this access. We've found with investments in USAID that money is better served empowering women and mothers because it goes better to the health of the children, the welfare of the child, but also the education of that child. So can you speak a little bit about how empowering this is for mothers, how it is for young boys, having a mother that's more in a position of having these resources?
Well, it's incredibly important, and like you said, the value of having a mother who's educated is not only important in their self-esteem, in their presence, but also in the more a mother is empowered, a woman will invest 90% of her income back into the community, into her family, into everyone's health and well-being. And so it's an incredibly powerful tool that we have to empower the mothers and the women in developing countries to have this knowledge, have access to, the more access to the knowledge that will empower them, the better.
Yeah. I don't know if any of the other witnesses wanted to touch base on that.
Actually, I guess I could just share a story that one of our colleagues who's here in the room shared that I think is quite telling of that. And it's a story of based on a case in Madagascar where women have put together a project to allow women to report gender-based violence using information and communications technology and using their mobile phones. And not only was it important for women to, through the project, to learn about their rights and report cases of domestic abuse, but their sons and their daughters became much more aware of the issues that their mothers were being faced and the rights that their mothers had as mothers, and would remind them to report those cases of domestic abuse when they took place, because they had the ability to have a tool that would allow them, and they would remind their mothers, you have the right to report and to not have to accept what's happening to you. And so that's a very powerful example of how not only the children, sons and daughters, can learn about the rights of their mothers, but their rights as children as well, and see the potential that some of these new tools can provide to them as they engage as people in their own lives.
Are you aware of any concerns to that? You know, this is an enormously powerful tool to mobilize people around a common cause, particularly internationally. But are you, not every country in this world, unfortunately, has the greatest of missions and purposes right now, and there are very oppressive governments and terrorist groups that are out there. Do you come across any concerns that in the hands of some of these countries or groups with deep packet technology that they can identify who's using these kind of technological tools and target them? And is there, if that's the case, is there something we can do about that?
Yes, I think that this is a concern, that some governments can use this as a way to oppress, to easily identify activists and others who may be trying to produce a counter-narrative. I think one of the things we found that's really important is in working with activists or journalists or others is to make sure that our work includes really good skill building in digital security, that this is an important element, that do individuals know? And I wanted to, just to add to that, there was a question about general harassment of women, not targeting of activists and others before. And I think in Iraq, one of the cell phone companies has developed a special plan with like a bye-bye button to like block callers who are harassing. So I think to the ability we can engage the mobile companies to understand what types of services would be female-friendly, that will both help them gain more customers, but also make the service have a more positive value.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I yield back.
Matt Salmon of Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, I want to go on the record agreeing wholeheartedly with Mr. Engel that Carly Fiorina could make a great president of the United States. Just having a little fun.
I would just point out that Gina Davis played one.
And as far as, since Ted Yoho opened up the door on movies, I have two daughters. My oldest is 35. The other one is 30. I think they get really angry for me telling their age. but they're both very well educated, very successful, and they would both be very thrilled to drive a convertible with Brad Pitt in the back. So anyway, you've done some phenomenal work, Ms. Davis, raising the profile. Every father that has daughters wants exactly the same opportunities for his daughters that he does for his sons. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons, and I want the same thing for all of them. You said that in maybe confronting is the wrong idea or wrong thought, but you've addressed with some of the leaders in Hollywood the disparity, and you've said that they've kind of referred by citing anecdotes of individual movies or productions. Are you making some headway, do you think, with them in general, and what are some of the things that we could do to maybe aid in that effort?
Right. Thank you. Yes, definitely. We're making great strides. I'm really heartened by the response to the research. It was before we had the research that I found that people were, even creators of content, were unaware of how few female characters they were including in their products. But once they know, and once they can engage with the research, they're very motivated to want to make change. We did a survey of everyone who's heard my presentation in Hollywood, in our industry, and 68% said what they learned had changed 2 or more of their projects, and 41% said it had changed 4 or more of their products. So, so we're very excited about that. There's lots of movies and TV shows that have come out that we know that we've impacted, and it's something that's very simple. For example, we were at an animation studio, and I mentioned that in some G-rated films, crowd scenes are made up of only 17% female characters, and you know, which makes no sense in the 21st century that we would be showing kids that much imbalance. And at the meeting, the head of the studio said, "Hey guys," because it was 99% men around the table, "can we just stop doing that? Can we just agree right here that we're going to make crowds 50%? And they all said, "Of course," because it was so unconscious. So I think a tremendous amount of our work is done simply by awareness. And as you suggested, it's not a confrontational way that I approach the studios at all. It's as a colleague in a very private and supportive environment, and we partner with them basically to bring it to the front of their minds, and it seems to be working, so I'm very optimistic.
I think diplomacy is something we all need a little bit more of, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Ms. George, as access to the internet increases around the globe, how can we leverage distance learning to help empower women and girls in the goal of increasing educational opportunities? Can we do more to encourage the development of country-specific distance learning in both basic education as well as university instruction? What specific steps would you recommend?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. As I said, you know, those specific target programs to help women and girls have access to education would be very important. It's also very important that education integrating technology starts very early on, and it's not just left at the primary level, as Joyce already made the case, but should continue and be very clearly expanded. I think actually the work of IREX and Joyce, you know, team in education is actually quite relevant for your question. Especially, we are partners in some of the work that we do, and one of the reasons why is because we believe in the power of libraries and public access in developing countries to be not only centers of knowledge, centers of education, but only centers for people to have access to these opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't be able to have on their own. Because access is so important, the reality is, as you probably understand, it's very difficult as it is now, and especially despite the growth in the sector, to make sure that all populations are covered with the right type of coverage that internet requires. And so because of that, and because clearly competition and markets by themselves have not been able to ensure that everyone has access to a connection, let alone being able to have the income to afford a connection when that might be possible. It's very important that public access is there, and it's strengthened to be one way to not only bring education opportunities, but to strengthen the kind of education programs and projects that are out there. And I would say I would really love Joyce to add to that, because IREX has done some really fantastic work in that area, integrating the education field and needs with libraries as a platform to improve education.
Thank you. I did mention that. I did want to actually add one thing that we're just starting to do now with Course Talk, which is kind of the Yelp of MOOCs. I don't know if they would say that's their official term, but that's how I describe them, and USAID, and that is we're trying to look at what MOOCs are looking like in the developing world. This is research that's just starting. We're also partnering with the University of Washington Tasha Institute on this. And one of the things we're trying to figure out, and we have 3 countries we're looking at right now, Colombia, Philippines, and South Africa, is how are people engaging with the MOOCs? How could they be used from a development? Most people are showing that people who take MOOCs are trying to advance their careers, their employability. So what factors increase that? What are the challenges? What are some of the gender issues there? And I think the research is ongoing right now, so maybe it's more of a preview that this is something we're concerned about. I think that when you look at engaging women and really all learners online, the ability to combine blended learning can also be very effective. So what does that mean? Maybe folks are online and they're remote from the main educational institution providing it, but there's an infrastructure in place for them to meet together in their village, the same people who maybe are learning together. And how do you blend that in person with the online learning?
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. We go now to Lois Frankel of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Ross, and thank you so much for this hearing. I consider myself pretty well informed on women's issues, but I have to say this is very shocking to me, and I thank all of you for being here. Because I know I often, every day I say to myself, how did we live without the internet? It's really something. And you know, even my mother is 90 years old, and she loves her pink iPad. I mean, she's on that iPad all day. And, you know, my niece has this little 2-year-old. I don't think he's even 2 years old. And we go out, and he grabs the phone, and he's playing games. So it's just, I'll say it's pervasive. But, so anyway, I have a few questions. I just want to say to Ms. Davis, I am a great fan. I'm glad to see you're alive and well. I've been worried about you. I know you went over the cliff. I saw you go over the cliff, and then I think you just went blind and died on Grey's Anatomy. Is that, did you live or did you die?
I didn't die. I only I had a
Oh, you had the brain tumor. That's
and
right.
then I went blind, but I didn't die, no.
Okay, that's good. I couldn't remember. Well, I knew you had the brain tumor, and anyway, I was worried about you, but I'm glad you're doing well. And so my first question is to you, which is, how do you fight, with what you're doing with the media, where does the box office come in, and how do you, get around the fact that I'm sure everybody, they look at the bottom line and making money?
Yeah, absolutely. So research shows that films about women or directed by women are equally successful once you adjust for the budget, but it's something that people are hesitant to embrace. There's this belief in Hollywood that women will watch men, but men won't watch women, so our hands are tied. That's why I don't talk to them about making more female stars. I say, whatever you're already making, add more women to the population. And the interesting thing is there's a test called the Bechdel test, which has a very low threshold. It's, are there at least 2 women who talk to each other about something other than men? And you would be amazed how many films do not pass this test. However, a study has shown that films that do pass that test make more money. So there's definitely evidence that adding more female characters is not only a good idea for our population, but is a profitable idea as well.
Thank you for that. Now, I've heard a couple of ideas for solutions, because I try to write them down. One, is, of course, is the whole media thing, Ms. Davis, that you talk about. But I heard you say expanding literacy to digital literacy, build on existing infrastructure, expand coaching opportunities. So here, my question is this: have you done an analysis at all of what, for example, USAID is doing? Is there a list of recommendations of how we, the Congress can engage either with budgetary items or policy?
Yes, thank you for the question. That's extremely relevant and exactly the reason why we're here. USAID has done some really fantastic work in supporting many of the programs that many of us are actually working on, both not just NGOs, but also the private sector or private sector organizations in trying to come up with better solutions to address this problem, including addressing the kinds of systemic problems around the gender income gap, and other kinds of inequalities that exist in society in general. But coming back specifically to ICTs and technology and access to the internet, what can be done better, and what can USAID and other agencies of the US government do to support that? A few things. One, give high priority to establishing time-bound targets for gender equity in ICT, access and use. There was an attempt to do that by the Broadband Commission at the UN level, a group that I was honored to be part of, in fact, inspired by a request by Gina here a few years ago. I'm afraid to say that we haven't done much headway into that. And the reality is that the gap still exists, and we don't see very clear gender equity in ICT access and use, but neither do we see in the kind of policy making that needs to be supported at the international level to ensure that not only gender analysis, gender considerations are included, but that policy is developed to address the gaps that exist. And so we have not made enough progress, and we need to, and it would be very important for the US to have an important role to ensure that that moves and that we can actually move the needle and ensure that policies are focusing on women. Affordability is an issue. The fact and the reason why I mentioned the income gap is that women across the world earn on average from 30 to 50% less than men. And by default, they are given a lot less opportunity, just from an income perspective, to be able to access, to purchase, to afford the kind of access that the internet requires. And so that's a huge problem that needs to be addressed. And by reducing costs and reducing prices to the end users is very critical to make sure that the reality of women's lives, that we hope continues to improve, is recognized when developing policy. If you're developing policy for the average person that doesn't exist, obviously a large group of the population is going to be left out of the impact of that potential policy, especially if they start from a different point. It's also very important to work with civic women's groups to find ways that technology can enhance civic participation. One of the most empowering effects of technology and access to the internet and the information that the internet brings to women is by allowing women to become more active citizens in their societies, with their governments, something that we here not only take for granted, but are able to exercise and enjoy the benefits of that benefit. Most women in developing countries don't have the ability to enjoy that, not only civic participation, but free and open civic participation without fear that their actions, their thinking, their ideas may not be retaliated against. And so we need to support that kind of civic engagement and civic participation by women, and especially by women's groups that are much closer to the lived realities of women in developing countries. And as some of our colleagues already mentioned, I would say, always put women at the center of policy making. Here we are in this room, people come in and out, but I can tell you, I've been counting how many of you women policymakers have been on the bench, and there's very few of you. And if there were more, many more of these issues would be considered. It's no different in any other part of the world. When women are at the center of decision-making, issues are thought differently from a different perspective. They are imagined in new ways. And so more women at all levels of planning, development, policymaking is absolutely critical to ensure that those concerns come through in the final result of policymaking, in international development, in the kind of support that we as a government here in the United States can make to international development, and the kind of impact that we want to see taking place as a result of our actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Lois, last month on our hearing on the anti-poaching bill, we had the Academy Award winner for Best Director. We had Catherine Bigelow here, who directed The Hurt Locker and also directed Zero Dark 30. So, Alan Lowenthal.
California. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. I apologize for coming a little late. Last night, as I was going through preparing for this, and I know we're kind of looking at both developing and developed nations, and I was shocked by something. It was the last paragraph of the memorandum that was put out by the chair of the committee, and where it said that in the United States, fewer women are now completing technology and engineering degrees than what occurred 30 years ago. So there are fewer now, and half of all that enter technology companies leave them by mid-career. These are staggering statistics, and it really just knocked me for a loop when I read that. And so what are we going to do from a policy standpoint here within the United States to really reverse this? Less than 30 years ago, it is just a shock. And I just want to know if you can help us as we begin to kind of grapple with this, both the idea of both access but also retention. How are we going to deal with this issue? And which is just shocking, absolutely shocking. And I ask for any help in not knowing kind of where to go from here.
So, in full disclosure, it's not my personal expertise, but I would say...
It's not mine either, so you can say anything you want.
Okay, thank you. I would say a couple things. One is I think many of the technology companies, as they look at how their family policies and others are designed and what it takes to advance and stay in the field is very important. There was a report done a few years ago by the Department of Commerce, actually, that looked at women in STEM and what's going on and why people go in and study and then leave the field. And I think that might be something that really looks at some of the patterns.
Are there some things that you remember from that really stand out?
Yeah.
Why we're going in the wrong? We're not even talking about being flat. We're talking about going in the wrong direction.
I don't remember if this was the #1 reason, but I think a lot of it had to do with the scheduling and the work and the being able to balance once you had a family, the workload and the hours. And
I got it.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to give some help?
I would just say that I think there's so little encouragement for women in this field that, there was a study at Yale not too long ago where they sent out resumes from, it was actually a woman's resume to apply for a position in the science department at colleges. And so they sent out identical resumes, except the first name was changed on some of them to a male first name. And it turned out that the man got far more offers for a position at a higher salary, and he was judged to be more likable and somebody that you would want to work with. So in the face of that your teachers from grade school on and your professors in college have bias against women in the STEM fields, it kind of makes sense that is reflected in how many women pursue it, how many, that we're not making we should have been building on.
That's right. But rather than building, we're going in the wrong direction.
Right.
And that's what's so shocking. I can understand beginning to build, to deal with some of these issues.
Right.
But to be going in the wrong direction is just shocking.
We just need a cultural shift as far as this is concerned, and this hearing is bringing a lot of attention to it, which I think is very welcome.
Well, thank you. Any other thoughts?
I'll just share a quick story.
Yes.
A personal story that I think it's telling of the realities that we face as parents, as citizens. I was looking just recently with my older daughter at different school options. And when I went to visit a particular school that I cannot disclose the name, I was asked, my daughter is very interested in math and science, but also she's a musician. And so we're talking about her qualities, et cetera, and the kinds of things that she wanted to get out of the school. The assistant headmaster asked me, oh, so what does your husband do? What is his profession? And so I told her, and she carried on the conversation. And so my daughter asked me, she didn't ask you what you did. And so, you're right. So I turned back to the assistant headmaster and said, are you interested in what I do? And she was pretty shocked and kind of embarrassed, so much so that she tried to overcompensate in even more embarrassing ways. But the truth is, that's the reality that we face, women, girls face in many environments, including in what are largely perceived as very well-educated, very important and nice schools, very privileged schools, I must say, and still the stereotypes and the kinds of things that we have to address are so ingrained, as Gina and Joyce have been saying, that are flabbergasting. And so I can tell you that none of my daughters would ever go to that school until another person changes. But this is the reality that women and girls face on their daily lives, regardless of where we are in the world, and in some places more so than others because of other issues. And so, can we do something about it? We can, and that's why we're here. And I hope that you, through your actions, through your policy making, through your support in international development, support programs that can help change these realities that should not exist.
And I think that's a wonderful reason for having this hearing, and I agree. But I think the narrative, just for us to be aware of just how serious the problem is in the United States, not just in developing nations when we're talking about developing nations, that we are going in the wrong direction, real clearly, raises a red flag that this is an amazing, this is such an important area that we need to be using our resources wisely, bringing all people into the system and making sure that everyone really is able to function as we move forward, and to the fact that we're losing women and not having them go into the most important professions, and the data is clearly going in the wrong direction, is really cause for great alarm. Great alarm. Yes.
I just want to add one more thing, just so that we also complete the thought, is that I think it's also important to think of these issues not just from a overall gender perspective, but thinking of all the different kinds of women and men in the world from different backgrounds. Because the kinds of things that we're discussing in terms of inequalities based on gender are even more exacerbated for women and some men, but especially for women of different races, different socioeconomic groups, and they face even greater barriers and greater obstacles in their lives. And so it's important to not just be aware from a general gender perspective, which is clearly very important, but also to be very aware of other differences that affect the way people have access to opportunities, including their backgrounds, whatever that might be.
And
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Lowenthal. And we'll be incorporating the testimony of our witnesses here in the legislation that we're writing in the committee. And we want to, again, thank our witnesses for their trips out here today and all the work they've put into this testimony. It's now part of the official record and will be part of our legislation. We stand adjourned.